Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division 2 video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you the Battlegroup preview for the 5th Panzer. Please remember that this is still beta and therefore everything is subject to change. My 5th Panzer Division is based on the balanced deployment type. It is just set to ramp up to the late game where I will end up using the majority of my Panzer Grenadiers and Panthers. Let's jump into the recon tab. The Aufklärer are my first choice. They come in with the Kubel MG. The Kubel MG is in itself a recon vehicle and so gives you that extra availability to work with from the same card. The Aufklärer Panther D is up next. This is a very strong tank to have in Phase A due to its 185mm of penetration. It also spots for itself quite well with its high optics. Then in Phase B I have the Aufklärer coming in with the BMW R75. This motorcycle can get them to the front line very quickly indeed, giving you all the information that you want. Other choices in the Recon tab include the BMW R75, which is the motorcycle with the MG. We have the SDKFZ 250-10 to choose from, which is the half-track with the AT gun. The SDKFZ 259, which is a half-track with the 20mm. And then we have the Speertroop, which are our standard 4-man MG Recon squad. And finally, the Aufklärer Panzer 4J. These you can get quite a lot of availability, so could be used to accompany Tigers in the early game and provide that recon that can spot the targets at a distance. Anyway, let's move on to the Infantry tab. Now there's one card in the Infantry tab that I would say is a must, and that is the Ersatztruppen. You can only bring them in Phase A without any veterancy. And that is because they are disheartened, which means they do get pinned down twice as quickly. However, they are fantastic value for money, allowing you to hold the front line much easier by spreading these guys about. So make sure that you bring them in and you use them to hold more points than you otherwise would. Panzergrenadier is next. I bring them in with the 2-star veterancy in order to improve the command radius. I also use Panzergrenadier instead of Pioneerführer or the Panzergrenadier with the Panzerfaust because they have smoke grenades, and that's very, very useful for keeping them alive. Pioneers are my next choice in Phase A. I bring in 6 of them with the Opel Blitz. They have the HE grenades that can be very effective early in the game. Then moving into Phase B, I bring in a card of Panzer Grenadiers with the half-track. These guys are great line infantry for filling out the front lines and supporting my tanks. And into Phase C, I have more of them available, however a choice between bringing them in with the Opel Blitz or with the half-track, depending on how many points I have and what the situation is, since the Opel Blitz can get the Panzer Grenadiers to the front line quicker, but the SDKFZ 251 does do a lot better job of actually supporting the unit and taking out enemy infantry. So the choice is there if I need it. Other choices in the infantry tab are the Feld Gendarmerie. What lets these guys down is their low strength. However, you can get quite a lot of them at a decent veterancy, so if you bring them in more than one at once, they're only 10 points apiece after all. Maybe you could overwhelm the enemy with like a 2v1. Next is the BMW R75 Führer, just an officer being carried around in his motorcycle. Then we have the Pioneer Führer that I already mentioned. It's just a leader squad with the HE grenade. Then we have the Panzergrenadier, which is a leader squad with a Panzerfaust. And the only other squad that we haven't looked at so far is the Sturm Pioneers, which are a 6-man squad with the flamethrower and smoke grenades. These guys are actually very strong, but I prefer to use the Pioneers in Phase A. Let's move on to the tank tab. Starting off, we have the Panzer IV Führer. This guy is great for accompanying the Tigers early on, as well as maybe some infantry in more closer combat scenarios. We then have, of course, the beautiful Tiger E's. These Tigers are great for smashing to pieces enemy armor in the early game. Just make sure that you don't leave them on their own, because they can get overwhelmed by T-34s if you do. We've got 2 cards of those, giving us 4 Tiger E's, possibly in Phase A. Moving into Phase B, I have a card of 4 Panther A's and the Panther A Führer. And these Panther A's, they have fantastic penetration, decent accuracy off the board. If you provide them with the extra veterancy from the Führer, then these will be hitting just fine and be doing plenty of damage, whilst also being very hard to kill. Into Phase C, it's more availability of Panther A's. Taking them in with no veterancy gives us 8 per card, which is an absolute ton. Making good use of those. And then I have the Panther G Führer to accompany them, just in case I need the APCR shells for the 250mm penetration, but also of course for the command itself. So that is my tank tab for now. Other choices include the Panzer IVs, of course. There is also the Panther G cards, but due to the lower availability, I'm not entirely sure that these are worth it until there's something that requires the 250mm of penetration to kill it. Let's move on to the support tab. In the support tab, I have the Opel Blitz munition trucks. I have only 2 of them. Very tempted to upgrade that to 3 by bringing them in Phase B, but that would be something that I would change another time. I have the Griller. These guys can be really good support at the 2000 meter range for hitting infantry, especially if they're trying to cross the open. So that's what these can be good for. Also, they can help other tanks pin down tanks with their HE value. And they do have quite a lot of blasts as well, so maybe they'll actually end up killing a unit they're hitting. Following that, I've just got the 2 commander units, the Befehl SDKFZ 251-3 and the Befehl Tiger. 2 commander units is usually enough. This Tiger can get quite exposed if you use it on the front line, so just be careful with it, but generally well worth having. Other units that you can get in the support tab include the flamethrower squads, the MG42 squads. Very nice unit this for pinning down infantry quickly. And we have the Flam Panzer. Unfortunately, the range on this really lets it down. Otherwise, it might have been more effective. We have the Multia munitions. Bring in more supply, but still generally low availability. And finally, the Befehl Panther A command tank. Let's jump into the anti-tank tab. There's not really too much going on in the anti-tank tab, but I am bringing in the Panzervernichtungs in the early game. These guys are 6-man squads. They have very good stealth, and so this Panzerschreck can end up being very deadly indeed, whilst the squad also has a survivability that if it fires and it misses, then it will most likely not die straight away. You'll have a chance to maybe escape. Whereas a 2-man Panzerschreck squad, like this one for example, would likely get taken out almost immediately if it ended up firing and missing. But following up from that, I have some Pack 40s in Phase B. I have some without veterancy, some with veterancy. These ones can be upgraded to level 3. So that will give them fantastic accuracy and damage. But just a bunch of Pak 40s really to flesh out our mid-game. In the anti-tank tab, other options include the Panzer 41, which is an AT gun that uses 28mm APCR shells, has 100mm of penetration, so useful in the early game, but maybe not so much later on. Pak 36, 37mm AT gun, has 180mm of penetration with its heat shell, but that only works at 800 meters, so bear that in mind. This AT gun can be great for ambushing enemy tanks. The standard AP shells only have 65mm of penetration. Then we have the Marder 3M. These Marders are pretty weak in terms of armor, so do not let them get engaged directly. The only good use for these that I've seen is just keeping them in light cover and ambushing your enemy from a distance. Just gotta hope they actually hit the mark with their first or second shot. And that's the anti-tank tab. Let's move on to the anti-air. So in the anti-air tab, I have the Flak 38 20mm in Phase A. You can get 4 of these on a card, but what is great about them is you can also bring them in with the SD KFZ11 flak, which is a 20mm on the back of a half track. So in Phase A, I've got that combination, and it allows me to bring in twice as much for the 4 availability. In Phase B, I have the 37mm AA. This is great because it has much better range than standard AI, and also is relatively effective at forcing back those aircraft. So definitely worth having. Finally, in Phase B, I have the SD KFZ71, provides the flak filling fire, which is generally very, very good and helps pin down enemy aircraft very quickly indeed. Other choices in the anti-air tab include the Gepard, which is a 20mm on tracks, and then we have, of course, the Flak 41 88mm. These can be relatively strong. Their AP shells do have 160mm of penetration, so watch out for those. Now moving on to the artillery tab. First of all, in Phase A, I have some 120mm mortars. These can provide some great suppressive fire onto targets that would otherwise be hard to kill. Then in Phase B, I have the Cannoneer. These are radio men that allow you to use corrected shot. Corrected shot being your arty having more accuracy and a faster aim time on its target. Then also in Phase B, I have the Vespa, bringing them in with 4 on a card, no veterancy. We'll have to make sure that I have some command nearby in order to make them a bit more effective. But otherwise, decent units, unlimited range, really do rely on the Cannoneers. Then into Phase C, we have the Batterieführer. These guys come in much less availability than their Russian counterparts, but are still worth having in my opinion. It's an extra card of command infantry that can sort you out moving into the late game. Finally in Phase C, I have the Hummel. These are very strong indeed with their 7 damage and almost 7,000 blast. You get these on target, they're going to do a ton of damage. Other choices in the artillery tab include the 81mm mortars. You can get a lot of these if you bring them in earlier on. Then there's also the SDKFZ 257 mortar half track. Great to avoid counter battery, these guys, that's for sure. Following that, the SK18 100mm. This is a very long range arty piece. It doesn't have a range, it can fire across the entire map with its 5 damage and almost 5,000 blast. The LEFH 18M, slightly more blast, also has smoke available. So I would always recommend bringing in the LEFH 18M over the SK100 if you're going to. Following that, the SDKFZ 251-2, which is the mortar half track, same as the 257. It just has the extra MG to help defend itself. Then we have the 105mm off map, the BAO Panzer 255. 105mm off map, not sure how effective that is honestly, but not been my choice so far. Then we have finally the 170mm off map, which comes in with the observer vehicle. Again, not entirely sure on the effectiveness of this unit, but might be worth checking out. Let's move on to the air tab. My air tab's very small. Small in general because the amount of cards that you can bring is limited, to say the least. But in my division, I'm bringing in the ME410 B2U2. This is a ground attack aircraft that can help you pin down enemy tanks nice and quickly, especially if you're going into close range engagements. This is what this is really useful for. You can also shoot down enemy aircraft if you get lucky. It has a lot of firepower, so we'll do so very quickly. Also in Phase B, I have the Focke-Wulf 190 A8s. Quite simply there to intercept enemy aircraft. Now, choices for the German Air Force include the AR-66C, which is simply a recon aircraft. No other armament or anything. Just 10 points recon that flies around in the sky. Very, very vulnerable to AA, so be careful with them. But you get a lot of them, and they're cheap. Then you have the DO 215B4. This is just simply a recon aircraft, the machine guns being turrets to help it defend itself. Then we have the DO 217J1, which is a ground attack aircraft, useful for pinning enemy forces, but not as good at it as the ME410. Then we have the JU87D3. Does the good old Stuka dive animation. Looks very cool doing so. And if you bring in a couple of them at once, they can definitely help you overwhelm enemy tanks. The only real issue with them is they're very slow. They have 310 km/h speed. If you compare that to the ME410, which has 610 km/h speed, you can see just how slow they go. Then we have the ME410A1, which is the fighter variant of the ME410B2, but honestly not worth bringing over the B2 simply because the agility is still bad. If the agility increased and got better for the fighter variant, then maybe it would be worth bringing. And that's it. In the defenses, it's generally your own preference. The only interesting thing with the MG42 bunkers is increasing them in veterancy potentially for the breakthrough mode. But there you have it, the 5th Panzer. Ramps up constantly till the late game. And basically you're trying to overwhelm your opponents with an abundance of Panthers and Panzer Grenadiers in the late game. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you would like to copy my battle group, then feel free. I'll leave the battle group code in the description as well, and hopefully that will work out for you guys. In the meantime though, hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.